Hello everyone, welcome to today's lecture where we're going to be talking about tuples, sets, and booleans. In our previous lecture, we've worked with some basic data types like numbers, string, and we've also worked with dictionaries, lists, and in today's lecture, we're going to talk about what tuples are, how to use them, how to create tuples, and also we're going to talk about sets and booleans. So without any further ado, let's get started with today's lecture. All right, so today we're going to be talking about tuples, and in Python, tuples are very similar to lists. However, unlike lists, they are immutable, right? And basically, when they say something is immutable, that means it can't be modified, right? That means it can't be modified. So unlike lists where we can go ahead to change the index of a particular value when we create them, in tuples you can't do that, right? Because they are immutable. So that's one of the key difference between lists and tuples. And basically, you would use tuples to present things that shouldn't be changed, like I said earlier, right? So, such as maybe days of the week or dates on a calendar, right? So, we know that those are constant and they are not supposed to be modified, right? And today, we're going to talk about how we can construct a list, right? We're also going to talk about basic tuple methods, right? We're also going to talk about immutability to see that we cannot go ahead to assign new value to a particular tuple. And also, we're going to talk about when to use tuples, right? And you would have an intuition of how to use tuples based on what you've learned about lists. So, in our previous lecture, we've worked with lists. So, if you know how to use lists very well, so using tuples is going to be also straightforward for you, right? And you can treat them very similar with the major distinction being that tuples are immutable, right? So you can treat tuples and lists as almost the same thing, right? It's just that tuples is immutable, while list is mutable, right? So let's go ahead to look at how we can construct a list. All right, please kindly confirm if you guys can hear me from the comment section. So first, we're going to look at how to construct a list. And to create a list, remember in our previous slide, all we had to do is just to say equals name our variables. I'm going to name this t, and t is going to be equals to, we're going to use a parenthesis, right? We use a parenthesis to create a list. Then we can specify the value that we want here, right? I can say 1, 2, and 3, right? So I can go ahead to run this. And similar to what we can do in tuples, you can also do that. Sorry, similar to what we can do in lists, where we can check the length of the total length of the item that we created. So we can also do that using tuples also, right? And if you can't see my screen, kindly go ahead to refresh, right? Um, everything is working fine here, right? So also to create a tuple, what you can do is check the length. So this has to create a tuples, right? And if you want to check the length of a particular item that was created, you can use the length method, right? So you can say len into brackets, right? Then t. Sorry, t, right? T is the variable name that we created here, right? I can go ahead to run this cell, and you can see that we're going to get the length of the tuples element that we have, which is 3, right? So similar to what you can do in lists, you can also do that here, all right? So, and you can also create different data objects, right? Different data object types in list in tuples also, right? So you can have something like t is equals to into bracket we're gonna have like 1, you can have 1, and here we can have 2, right? And it can run this cell, right? So if I go ahead to show what we have in T, you can see we have 1 and 2. Right? So what we just did here is we just reassigned the variable, right? We talked about that also in our previous lecture. All right. So you can also use index to grab an element from to grab an item from a list, just like from a tuple, just like how we did in list also, right? So I can say something like T, then square brackets, right? Then I can say 0 here, right? So if I say 0, it's going to print out what 1, which is the first element in the list, right? And we basically looked at this in our previous lecture, right? Nothing really special here, right? You can also grab the last item in a tuple. So I can say tuple, sorry, t, then I'll just specify the index number I want to grab, which is -1. which is the last item in the particular list, right? And if I run this cell, you can see that we have 2, right? So basically, that's what you can do in list, how you can index, how you can slice list. You can also apply that here, right? So let's look at let's look at some basic methods that we have in lists, all right? Good morning, everyone. Yes, you can hear me very clear right now because we've gone ahead to fix um we've done our settings very well and we are good to go. All right. So good morning, everyone. All right. So let's look at some basic list method. And to be honest, tuples have built-in methods, but not as many as lists do. Right. So let's just take a look at 2 of them. Right. So I can say something like t dot index. Right. And yeah, I can say I want to get the index number of where this item 1 is, right? So the item 1, what index is it in, right? So if I run this cell, you can see that we have what index what 0, right? And that's correct because index 0 we have what 1 here, right? So you can also say you want to count total number of item that we have in that list. So I can say t count, right? T dot count into bracket, and I want to count the total number of one item that we have, right? So how many one do we have in our tuples here? And it's going to go ahead to count it, right? It's going to return the total number of element that we have in that tuple, right? So you can see we just have 1, right? So it just appeared only ones, right? And lastly, let's take a look at if truly tuples are immutable, right? So remember in list we can go ahead to assign values, assign data to a particular index number, right? So let's take a look at if we can do that here, right? So what we can do right now is we can say something like so let's look at if you can reassign different values to a particular item, right? So I can say my t, so now see at index what 0. I want to change it. Remember in list we can do this, right? I want to change this to let's just say change, right? Just the name of a variable change, right? um right, so if I run this cell, you can see that we have what an error, which says that what tuples object does not support item assignments, right? So that's one of the major difference between tuples and lists, right? You do not you can't reassign value to a particular item that was created, right? So it's immutable. That's one of the major difference. And you might be wondering that, okay, when should I use list then if list has fewer methods and it can actually do um list can actually do what tuples can do, right? So when should I use tuple rather, right? So basically, to be honest, tuples are not really used often, right? Compared to our lists are basically used in in Python programming language, right? But one key note to always take to always know is that it, whenever you want to undo a task that immutability is necessary, right? If your program you are passing around an object and you need to make sure that it does not get changed, right? So you can go ahead to use tuples then, right? Tuples become your major friend or your major solution that you can use to achieve to solve that particular problem or task, right? And it provides a convenient source of data integrity, right? So when I mean data integrity, I mean like you are confident that okay, you can't go ahead to create a new value, you can't go ahead to change the particular value of assigned before, right? Then you can go ahead to use tuples, right? And basically you should now be able to create and use tuples in your programming as well as you've um as well as with TD already, right? So this is just the basic type of basic methods and basic type that we can do in tuples, right? So now that we've talked about tuples, which is very simple and straightforward, right? So let's go ahead to look at set and booleans, right? Look at set and booleans. All right. So what is set and what are booleans, right? These are basically the last two data type. So this would be set and booleans, right? And this is basically the last two data type that we're going to talk about, right? Before we go ahead to do our assessments, right? But basically, if what are sets, right? So sets are basically an unordered collection of unique elements, right? So we can construct them by using a set keyword. then into brackets, right? Into parentheses rather, right? Function. So I'm going to explain what I mean by that very soon. Don't worry. So, quickly, let's go ahead and see how we can use set, right? So I can do something like x is equals to sets, right? So to create a set element, you're going to do like this, right? So you can see that it's showing green, right? Which means it's a keyword, right? So x is equals to set, and this is how you create set in Python, right? Now, let's take a look at how you can add items to a set, right? So to add items to a set, I can say like my x dot add, right, into brackets, into parentheses rather, right? And I can say I want to add a value 1 to it, right? I'll run it. Now, if I run this cell and I go ahead to check what we have in our set, right? So I can just say x, print x, what we have here, and you can see that now it is printing out 1, right? But notice something that is coming out, is printing out a what? A curly brace, right? And this does not indicate that it's a dictionary, right? But you can actually look at sets, you can actually draw an analogy that they are dictionary with only keys, right? So you can basically say that that's how sets are basically are, right? Because we don't specify any values, right? We just specify just one item and we are good to go, right? So let's go ahead to add more item. I can say x dot add, right? So I'm going to say add to, right? Run this cell, and if I say x now, you see that we have 1 and 2, right? So one of the unique thing about sets is you can go ahead to reassign the same value inside a set, right? That's why we said they are unique, right? They are unique elements, unordered unique elements, right? So you can specify any value inside the list. They are unordered and they are basically unique also. So you can't see you want to have more than one value in a particular set, right? So let me just show you what I'm talking about. So for example, I can't say that I can't if I try to say x dot add, right, into bracket, and I try to add 1, right, what should happen here, right? Basically, once we run this cell and we try to check x, you might think that we should have 1 comma 2 comma 1, right? But that's not how set works, right? Set is basically unique throughout. So automatically, if you try to add the same element into a set, then obviously you are not going to get what you're expecting. It's going to just return the unique element in that particular set that you've created, right? So now let's take a look at this in more details, right? Um, so let's create a list with repeated items, right? So I can say my list, for example, list 1, right, is equals to, remember I told you why I'm using list 1, not ordinary lists, all right? So I can say 1 comma 1 comma, sorry, 1 comma 1 comma 2 comma 2 comma 2 comma 3 comma 4 comma 5 comma 6 comma 1 comma 1, right? So if I go ahead to check list 1, right, we should have something like this, all right? So let me just create a new cell, escape B, right? So you can see that we have 1 1 2 2. Basically everything we listed here, that's what we have in our list, right? In our list 1. So now what we can do is we can use sets to basically filter out the unique items here, right? So I can say set list 1, right? If I go ahead to run this cell, you can see that now we now have 1 comma 2 comma 3 comma 4 comma 5 comma 6, right? So set is going to return the unique item that you have in a particular list, right? So you can take a look at sets as uh, something that stores unique elements, right, in an unordered way. All right. So now you understand what set are, right? So just know that they are basically used to return unique items, to filter out unique items in a particular list, right? In a particular item that was created. All right. So now that we've looked at sets, basically these are just the basic things you need to know, right, about sets. So let's go ahead to talk about booleans, right? So booleans, right? Before we end this lecture, all right? So I'm gonna say escape M, turn it to a markdown. can see it's now a markdown cell, and I'm going to say shift enter. All right. So if you guys also want me to do a tutorial about how to use markdown, you can also let me know in the comment section. All right. So you guys are going to know how to jot down when you are basically writing also. All right. So basically, what are booleans, right? Um, Booleans, to be honest, is something that you guys use almost in your day-to-day activity, right? It's just something that is logical, a logical statement, all right? But basically, Boolean type in Python comes with a predefined value which is true or false, right? So when we say something is, when we're using Boolean data type, what we're saying is, it's either a statement or a value is true, right? And don't forget, we used capital letter TRUA for booleans. So it's either a certain value is either true or it's what? Or it's false. All right. So that's one major thing about boolean, right? And to be honest, when do we use boolean, right? So for example, if you want to check um some certain conditions in your programming when you're coding, like is A greater than B, right? If A is greater than B, return true, else return false, right? So those are where you can use boolean, right? And let's quickly walk through how we can create booleans in Python. For example, I can say like my A is equals to what? True. Now notice that I'm using a capital letter here, right? I'm always hammering on this, right? Because I know most beginners tend to fall into this loop. All right. So notice that I'm using a a capital letter here. So I can say, if I try to say A is equals to CRUE, you can see that it's not returning um you can see that it's not returning a particular, it's not returning like the color isn't showing green, right? So it's not showing that is a keyword. So if I try to run this cell, you see that we're going to have error that is saying that true is not defined, right? Because Python is seeing this true as a string, not the data type, right? Which is something you should basically take note of. All right, so you're seeing it as a string, not a data type. So to create a boolean in Python, you're going to use capital letter C R U E, right? So we're going to run this cell. Now we are good to go. All right, so if I say A now, we're going to see that is what's true, right? And you're going to see how this really comes in handy very soon. All right, so for example, Python we can actually use comparison operator to create booleans, right? And we are going to go over comparison operator very later in this course. But let me just show you quickly how we can use comparison operator to create booleans, right? So I can say, for example, one greater than two, right? So it's going to return either is true or false, right? So you can see false. I can say three is three greater than two. You can see it's returning true. You can take note that it's returning was capital letter TRUE and capital letter FALSE, right? That's one key to take note of, right? So quickly, let me just show you guys how booleans really comes in handy, right? So for example, if I want to check a statement like if, for example, if if one is greater than two, right? So if one is greater than two, print, right? I'll just say print one is greater than two, right? And else, so I'm saying else, if one is not greater than two, print two, one, I can say one is not greater than two. So if I run this cell, you can see that it's coming out to say one is not greater than two. And basically what's happening here, so this is just a basic Python statement, and we are going to cover statement also very soon in our upcoming lecture. But basically, what I'm trying to just tell you here is what Python is doing here is Python is using a boolean. So for example, if one is greater than two, is this statement true or false, right? So the statement that is written here is only going to run if what is here is true. So if this one is true, if this statement, if this particular logic we wrote here is true, this statement is going to run. right? If it's false, and this is going to satisfy this else condition, which is true, right? It's going to go ahead to run this particular one, right? So basically, Python also uses logical operator to check for a particular statement that was written. So for in this case, Python is using an operator, a boolean value to check. Okay, if had it been this was true, right? It was going to run. It's going to run this one, right? But basically, this statement is false. One is not greater than two. That's why it did run this cell, right? That's why it went ahead to run this cell. All right. So basically, that's how you can use this is just a simple use case of boolean, right? Because you can say yeah, it's going to return false. All right. We're going to cover what's it called? We're going to cover operators very well in an upcoming lecture. I just wanted to show you guys quickly how you can basically just use it, right? It's something really simple and straightforward. All right. So that's all about that. So for example, you can also try to assign a non-type, right? So for example, I can say B is equals to none, right? And if I try to print B, it's going to return none. And basically, you can use none as a placeholder for an object, right? So for example, if you don't want to assign any value yet, right? You just want to create a particular variable name, you can use none type for that, all right? And basically, that's that about tuples, set, and booleans, right? So you can see that they are very simple to use once you can understand the syntax, right? Understand the syntax very well, and you are going to be good to go, right? So with that being said, that will be the end of today's lecture. In our upcoming lecture, we're going to look at statements, comparison operators rather, in our upcoming lectures. But before we dive into that, you are going to be given an assessment that's going to cover the basics, all the things you've learned, basic Python object and data types. We're going to look at that in our upcoming lecture. So I'll see you there. Bye bye.